What's that? Okay, talking about slope-intercept form. So a lot of people are already familiar with, and I've heard you guys say a lot, y equals mx plus b. And this is actually the slope-intercept form of an equation. M stands for the slope, and b, because when x is 0, all that would be left is b. What do we call b again? Y-intercept. So some people call this slope y-intercept form. Just to abbreviate it, we call it slope-intercept form. So let's talk about chickens again. We said y was the cumulative cost of owning chickens, and x was the number of months we own them. The variables are defined. The cumulative cost is modeled by the equation y equals 20x plus 400. Using the graph below, state the slope of this equation. So we were talking about the slope being the rise over the run. And you can literally take any 2 points. I start here. How much do I go up? How much do I go over? How much do I go up? How much do I go over? So my rise, because we had to look at the scale, right? The scale that we use on the y-axis is 100. The scale we're using on the x-axis is 1. So our slope is 100 over 5, or what was it? 20. And we see that right there in the equation. There's the slope. Explain what the slope represents in the context of the situation. So if we're explaining it, that is a sentence answer. So what could the sentence answer be? What is it? What would you say the slope is in the context? Yeah. It costs $20 per month to own chickens. What is the value of x equals 0? This is referring to the y-intercept. So when you have the chickens for 0 months, how much did you pay initially to start owning chickens? $400. So when x is 0, y is 400. I'm writing it here. The setup or initial cost is $400. That's explaining it in the context. I actually went ahead of myself. So here was the graph. We see the y-intercept. The y-intercept is always going to happen when x equals 0, and it's always going to occur on the y-axis. You also would have an x-intercept, but you can't really see the x-intercept because it would have happened when, are you going to ever have 0 cost for your chickens? Not if you own them, not if you buy all the things. That would have been the x-intercept would have happened in negative months. Maybe that's when you had to start saving up, if you were saving $20 a month or something. Okay, so, and then the slope we see is actually, the slope describes the steepness of the line. Recently, I was thinking, you don't really use graph paper that much unless you're in a math class. You don't use rulers that much. But the other day, actually, I went to a cafe and I saw a girl who had graph paper and a ruler out. And you know what she was doing? I had to ask her. I was like, what are you doing? Are you doing math? You're doing some math. I see this. You're doing math. Well, I happen to know her, so it wasn't just like some random person that I walked up to. But she was actually working for a nonprofit where they were going to create a ramp for a house. And isn't the ramp of the house? She was like, oh, I have to calculate the rise and the run. And actually, to be compliant with the American Disabilities Act, the ADA, you can't have a ramp that's super steep, You have to have it have a certain slope so that somebody doesn't go flying down the ramp. That would be dangerous. But, you don't want it to be so shallow that they're going to take forever to get up to the building. So that would be something in real life where we're dealing with slope as well. Steepness, you can see that in a ramp, right? And that's going to be the rise over the run in that situation. That's why she had the graph paper and the ruler out. Okay, so the slope-intercept form of an equation of a non-vertical line with a slope of m and a y-intercept of 0b is y equals mx plus b. So identify the slope and the y-intercept of each of the lines below. Anytime you have the coefficient of x, that's your slope. M equals -9. If you plug in 0 for x, what would be left if you plug in 0 for x? 4. There it is. Here, what's the slope? And what's the y-intercept? There you go. What's the slope here? M equals, what's the number in front of x on that one? -1. What's the y-intercept? Yes. Okay, so here's some word problems. The weight in pounds of a plastic tank holding X gallons of water can be modeled by 8.3454x plus 67. Suppose that a truck will be hauling this plastic tank. I got tank and truck mixed up. It's not surprising, right? What is the slope of the graph of this equation? So just based on that equation, can you tell what the slope is? Yeah, m equals 8.3454. Explain what the slope represents in the context of the equation. Okay, if we go back to these variables, y is pounds, x is gallons of water. So if you were to plug in numbers here, 1 gallon of water, 2 gallons of water, 3 gallons of water, how is that changing, and what am I getting? What does that slope mean? 8.3454. Anybody have any ideas? Close. The weight of the plastic tank when it's empty, when it has 0 gallons of water in it. Oh, actually, if we made a table of values, right? X is gallons and Y is the weight, the total weight. So if you have 0 gallons of water, how much does that tank weigh? Oh, because that's the y-intercept. So the tank itself weighs how much? Yeah, I just asked you the same question. You're like, I already answered that question. It's confusing. So we actually know what the y-intercept is. The y-intercept is 0.67. That means the tank, when empty, weighs 67 pounds. So what does that 8.3454? Does anybody know anything about what does that number mean, the slope? What do you think? Yes! Because for every gallon you put in, if I put 1 gallon in, ooh, this is going to be some hard math. 8 plus 7 is 15, 75.3454. Don't make me do any more. It's easy to add 8, but it's hard to add all those decimals. So you're exactly right. Each gallon of water weighs 8.3454 pounds. Don't ask me why we're not using the metric system. Okay? We should be practicing with the metric system. So does everybody understand why we're getting that number from? As 1 gallon goes up, the pounds go up. Because actually this is an implied over 1. Here's our pounds going up. Here's our gallons going up. For every 1 gallon, our weight is going to increase in the tank by 8.3454 pounds. Yeah? Okay, a little bit of word problems is always good. Questions about that? Okay, let's keep going here. Okay, so my favorite thing about the slope-intercept form is that it's actually really easy to graph. Before we were doing all these points in a table. But if I know the y-intercept and I know the slope is the rise over the run, all I have to do is start with the y-intercept. And so I'm going to identify for each one here, m equals 3 over 1. The reason why I write it as 3 over 1 is that way I know what the rise is and I know what the run is. And that's the reason why when it comes to graphing lines, we don't really care if the slope is a fraction, it's not that bad. Right here, the slope is a fraction. It's just rise over run. Okay, so I'll do this example and this example, and then you guys will do the others. What's b, or the y-intercept in this example? 1. And I actually prefer it as an ordered pair. 0, 1. When you plug in 0, you're 1. Y-intercept always goes on the y-axis. Now if we use the slope to graph the other lines, and I have a little ruler here too, if I want to use the slope, I can go rise 3. That means I'm going to go up 1, 2, 3. Run 1. I'm going to go over 1. My next point is right here. Now remember we were saying if I have a negative divided by a negative, can I graph that? A negative divided by a negative. If I want to get points on the other side, I could go down 3, 1, 2, 3, backwards 1. Here's another point. I really just technically need 3 points to graph a line. And if I wanted to see if I wanted to check, because do you think that people ever mess up rise over run? Do you think that happens? It does. Okay. A lot of times people will mix up the rise and the run. They'll go run over rise or something. It's a very easy mistake to make. So I'm a fan of checking. You could take this point 1, 4. If you plug it in, 4 equals 3 times 1 plus 1, 4 equals 4. That's just a check to make sure that, okay, if that point works, I could check multiple points if I want to. Now let me show you how we would graph. Actually, you know what? I'll just go ahead and graph all of these while we're at it. So here we have the slope m equals 5 over 1. What's the y-intercept b? 0. A lot of times I will hear people say there's no y-intercept. There is a y-intercept, but it is just 0. So our y-intercept is 0. We start out at 0, 0. And we're going to go up 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, over 1. Or I could go down 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, backwards 1. And again, if I wanted to check these points, I could always identify the ordered pair and check it. Don't forget to use a ruler and graph paper and put arrows on the end, okay? Now let's talk about a negative slope here. These both have positive slopes. So you see that a slope of 3, our line is increasing from left to right. A slope of 5 is positive, our line is increasing. Which one is steeper, 3 or 5? The 5 should be steeper, right? Because we're increasing more quickly. And then here, what's our slope? Negative 2 over 1. What's our y-intercept? Negative 3 or 0, negative 3. So where do I start? Yeah, I'm going to take my y-intercept. I'm going to go to the graph. I'm going to find negative 3. It has to happen on the y-axis. So we go down here to negative 3, 0, negative 3. Now I'm going to rise negative 2. Well, rising negative 2 actually means going down. So if I go down 2 and I run positive 1, that's this point. Down 2, 1, 2, over 1. Or 2 over negative 1. Is that the same thing? Positive 2 over negative 1. As long as the signs are different, still a negative 2. So we go up 2, backwards 1, up 2, backwards 1, 1, 2, 1, up 2, over 1, and we can plot these points, we can graph them. If I'm not sure if it's correct, I could take one point, maybe this point, 2, -7, I could check that. -7 equals -2 times 2 minus 3. -7 equals -4 minus 3. -7 equals -7. My point with the check is to show you, I think a lot of people don't like to check. At least that's what I've learned from grading papers, is that people don't like to check their work. But I just want to show you it's not that hard to check it, right? Oh, damn. Yeah. And this one is from last time too. Okay, so let's look at this one. This is a fraction. A lot of people are afraid of fractions. Don't be afraid of fractions. Fractions are just rise over run. If you have, when it comes to slope, m equals 1/3. That's the rise. That's the run. Y-intercept, 0, 2. So where do we start the graph? We're always going to start the graph where? Y-intercept. Does everybody see where the y-intercept is and how to start there? Does that make sense? Y-intercept is going to happen on the, yes, y-axis. Okay, here's 0, 2. Now if I rise 1 and I run, so I go up 1 over 3, 1, 2, 3. Up 1 from that point, over 3, 1, 2, 3. Or I could also go down 1, back 3. Remember that a negative divided by a negative is also a positive. So from the y-intercept, I could go down 1, backwards 1, 2, 3, down 1, backwards 1, 2, 3. And you kind of see that those x values are the multiples of 3 that we were talking about before that you would put in the table, right? So let's connect these points. And the checkpoint, even though you have a fraction and you're groaning, you don't want to do your checkpoint, I'm just going to take any point. I think positive numbers are easier to deal with. Here's 3, 3. If I want to see if that works out, I'm going to plug in 3 equals, this is my check, 1/3 of 3 plus 2. 3 equals, what's 1/3 of 3? 1. What's 1 plus 2? 3. So it worked. Yeah? So we notice that if we have a positive slope, all of our lines are going to be increasing. If we have a negative slope, what does our line do from left to right? A negative slope will always decrease from left to right. So if you look at this line and you're like, okay, that's decreasing, you want to double check and look at your slope. Is the slope negative? You see what I'm saying? So this is going to require a lot of practice. 300 times. You need to graph 300 lines in order to make sure you really know it. Oh my gosh, we have some word problems coming up too. More word problems. Okay, so for the following ones, I want you guys to go ahead and do this. I want you to find out what the slope, what the y-intercept is, and then come up with the equation, and then we'll share out on those problems.